Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations.
We're all tired of hearing about synodality, for sure. But at this point, the Synod on Synodality is coming back in a month. In a month, it kicks back into gear, and it will be the 5-year anniversary since the Pachamama debacle when it launches right around the feast of St. Francis of Assisi in October. And the rhetoric is already ramping up in preparation for what we are being told is finally going to be the final meeting of the Synod on Synodality. After the Synod does its thing this October, it's going to issue a report and hand it off to Pope Francis, and presumably while he's reading their report and taking into consideration everything he's going to do when he issues his own final rulings, while that's happening, there will be some working groups meeting in the spring of next year. So the Synod is not done, and I would be shocked if they did not announce that there was still more that needs to be done with these working groups. So either we get more working groups after this, or we get another meeting of the bishops in the coming fall. None of those will surprise me. But for now, the intention is that by summer of next year, the Synod on Synodality, which will have lasted longer than Vatican II at this point, will finally be over, and then probably after that they'll announce the next Synod, because we are in a synodal church now, synods without end. And it's been that way for some time. But the rhetoric is ramping up, and now we have a respected theologian in Germany talking about how the New Testament endorses synodality, at least in its consensus-seeking group decision-making processes. Yeah, they're going now invoke Scripture to really try to emphasize the idea, the core value of synodality, which is to decentralize decision-making from the hierarchy and to include the laity in more of these processes. Then I'm going to use a phrase I've used many, many, many times to describe how dumb this idea is. They're going to take the worst catechized generation in history, worse than the previous one, which was the worst catechized generation in history to that point, and involve them in the decision-making process in the church. Hand-selected members of those groups. What could go wrong? So we turn to katholisch.de, the official news arm of the German bishops, for this headline. Theobald on World Synod. New Testament knows majority decisions. At the World Synod next autumn, New Testament scholar Michael Theobald is calling for a look at the New Testament. Cold decisions are alien to the gospel. It knows majority decisions. But what role does the Pope play in all of this? That last part, what role does the Pope play in all this? You're going to see a document that a lot of people poo-pooed suddenly coming back into this. And that was that document that the Vatican issued a few months ago. That was sort of a feeler document, a proposal, nothing official, but a proposal that power be decentralized out of the hands of the Pope. They become like a first among equals, a first among peers thing, in order to sort of bait Protestants to come back to Catholicism without actually having to surrender any of their non-Catholic errors that they have. It's weird stuff. And it caused a lot of pushback, but the defense was, well, this is an unofficial document. This is not a policy thing. This is just a proposal to explore the question kind of thing. And now it's coming back, because that's how it always works. Now, a German website for academics describes Professor Theobald in this way. Quote, Michael Theobald is distinguished for many important contributions to New Testament exegesis and biblical theology. The majority of these were made at the Seminary for Catholic Theology at the University of Tübingen. Theobald made major contributions to research into Pauline literature and theology. The letters named Deutero-Paulinen, the literature of the Johannine Circle, the Christian practice of Eucharistic meals, but he's best known for his studies to Romans, important for the Christian-Jewish dialogue. He demonstrated the relevance of the Israel chapters in Romans and of the Elder Brothers' profile of the Pauline theology in general for renewal of Christian theology after redacted. At the present, he explores the question of the antipathy towards our elder brothers in the fourth gospel in the context of the parting of the ways between the church and the old covenant. End quote. And you'll see something troubling there. He'll say his theology involves the seeing all of that as a parting between the church and Israel, but the church is the new Israel. You begin to see the problem with some of the theology here. Now, another website describes his thinking in this way, which may illustrate something that you're to brace yourself for. Quote, Michael Theobald takes stock of the research of the last 100 years and sketches a new approach to the history and theology of Jesus' last days. End quote. And that, folks, is just critical theology. That's all it is. And if you're familiar with critical theology or the church's condemnations of it, none of the rest of this is going to surprise you. So, to Katholisch and its article, quote, with a view to the upcoming World Synod, the emeritus New Testament scholar Michael Theobald from Tübingen believes that the New Testament knows no problem with majority decisions. In an article for the Herder Korrespondenz, a September issue, he therefore asks why the Vatican constructs a contradiction between spiritually guided consensus building and democratic rules, and where the fear of accepted paths comes from. The New Testament knows majority decisions. As examples, he cites Paul in the letter to the Corinthians, see 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 6 to 8, who respects a majority decision but at the same time acts as an advisor, and the evangelist Matthew, who in his congregational speech, in Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 to 17, attributes to the congregation the highest binding and loosening power. Cold decisions are alien to the gospel, says Theobald. Above all, the evangelist Matthew incorporated the struggle for a synodal consensus into the prayer of the church. In the gospel passage already quoted, it says, quote, again, amen, I say to you, if two of you are on earth agree about anything they ask, it'll be granted to them by my Father in heaven. This statement says the emeritus New Testament scholar should not be reduced to small prayer groups. It is about the value of two peoples in the community sounding together, especially when a majority decision or consensus is reached, Theobald continues. The metaphor of architecture used in the context of the World Synod should therefore not be forgotten. The maxims are to continue building, rebuilding, renovating, not total demolition, it says. End quote. Let's translate that. The maxims are for total continual change. Not total demolition, but total continual change. But here's the thing. If you keep changing and changing and changing the faith, after a while, you're going to destroy the faith and leave something new in its place, which I know is a metaphysical impossibility. I will remind you something I'm going to have to remind people of all the time as we go head into Synod season again. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church. We have that promise from Jesus Christ himself, true God and true man. If our blessed Lord can promise you that the faith will prevail, then enjoy the ride. Hang on tight to the faith, because you know that those pushing for changes are going to lose in the end. But you notice what he's doing here. He's distorting the gospel to advocate for giving some binding, loosing power to laity. What could go wrong? Talk about relativism. Imagine having 50 years from now, encountering a Catholic who believes completely different things than you, but is in good standing in the church. And I don't mean on secular political issues, or things that the church has been a little wishy-washy on defining, especially in these last several decades when the church hasn't really been in the business of defining things. Imagine that scenario, because he wants binding and loosing in the hands of the laity. This is a destruction of the priesthood and a destruction of magisterial authority, if he gets his way. And all of this is predicated on the Vatican's new document about decentralizing papal power. You remember back when that was published and people said, oh, it's not a big deal. Well, now we know better. This is how it always starts. Oh, they put some feelers out there. Oh, come on, this is not real. Don't worry, this is just a proposal document. And then some people pick up the proposal document and quietly read it, and then they incorporate it to their arguments for more radical change. The next step will be for them to, maybe in the next synod, imagine a synod on the papacy announced. Do I need to tell you how horrible that could be? Let's hope that's not what the next synod is. But that's how this starts. Quote, in this context, the New Testament scholar raises the question of how the Bishop of Rome can get involved in the synodal church in view of the perceived monarchical exaltation of his office. Note that they called him the Bishop of Rome and not the Pope. Interesting that. Theobald praised the recently published study document of the dicastery for promoting Christian unity on the primacy of the Pope and underlined the idea contained therein that the Roman primacy should be understood less as universal power in a universal church, but rather as an authority in the service of the community between the churches. This is him elevating schismatic heretical groups to being churches when there is only one church. Yes, we talk about like the church in Portland or the church in Bulgaria as churches. But the church has never referred to various Protestant groups as churches in any official capacity until very recently. And this is a proposal to elevate that. Theobald commented, "A distinction should be made between the function of the Pope as head of the Catholic Church and his intended role as witness and mediator, not guarantor, of the unity of Christian churches." He asked whether this meant that the unfortunate talk of ecclesiastical communities outside the Roman Catholic Church from the time of Benedict XVI had become obsolete. Given the need to integrate theological and pastoral competencies into a future church assembly, a council of the Roman Church is therefore necessary, he writes, and no longer in the Vatican, but in the Lateran, under the chairmanship of the Bishop of Rome, in the recognition that the place of the Petrine office in the Universal Communio Ecclesiarum has yet to be found. End quote. This is a respected theologian on biblical exegesis, talking about removing Peter from his throne in the name of dialogue and unity. You do not get unity in anything but the truth. To be unified in a falsehood is to have left the faith. This is what is being proposed for the next synod by one of the most influential theologians in possibly the most influential bishops' conference in the world, the German bishops. It's a contest between the Germans and the Americans because of our financial influence in Rome. Never forget that. Buckle up, folks. The never-ending synod on synodality is about to recommence. I wonder what you think about this, so let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And if you've ever thought about supporting the work of Return to Tradition, now is a great time to do so. Your support does help keep these daily messages coming. Links in the description box below to Patreon, Subscribestar, or that join button. All those options were asked for by other viewers of this channel. And I thank you in advance. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.